here.
I only added. Let's wait. Five shares. Does that have anything to do with it?
Code analysis. Here it said code analysis.
Project preference.
And this one up here is code. Oh yeah, this is code analysis also. So your code analysis.
Yeah, PDF. I got the PDF. Thank you for looking at that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Try to disable some of these.
Which ones can I get away with disabling?
We had that one. Sure.
Well, how about Visual Studio Intelligence?
AI system developer.
Well, it was originally referencing IntelliSense. Maybe that's override. Yeah, let's. That was great.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning really early. I couldn't get up to sleep, so I went out and started working on it. The first thing I got was that error. And it redlined everything. I had 9 errors. Just bed, everything was cool. Well, we close it, restart it. Ooh, that's a good one.
Disable. Oh.
I was going to say we can put it, if you don't, I don't know if you have it with you.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say we can put it on your desktop and under PC desktop.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, look, right here. It's turned on. Turned on, look.
How is that? So it's other class is growing. Well, I think maybe if we Visual Studio.
So
Stop and like
close this and
You're banking on the fact that you won't know how to solve it, you throw that in the device. Start with the laptop. Not very well.
Any personal photo at all?
Okay, so you're in progress. Nope. Oh. Oh, yeah. That is so weird. Maybe I need to update it. I'll check that. Okay. I'm just curious, like, what caused that to happen? Already transited to graphics. The thing that I don't know, it's great that they're instrument. So it'll be fine, and then it's like, oh, no, we don't want it. Yes, I noticed that it's a must.
Here. It's your version of it. Or you fix it by reinstalling your Visual Studio. Just have it backing.
Okay. As far as this year.
It has to be because you don't have a year on it.
So that is it. This is that thing. Here, you work like that? It doesn't matter. Just go ahead and look at it. Okay. Now look.
Delete the .ds folder from the solution level. Things like that.
Yeah. Here's what you do.
Oh, you gotta do it.
Or,
All three of them. Same folder.
that's one of the, it does not work.
Is it Jacob or Jacob?
You like it? Should I reopen it?
Yeah.
Should I go to sports? Should I go to these get involved in the league? Maybe it's a solution. It's a solution. The solution. Yeah,
Guys, go ahead, connect to the Zoom session if you want. Our guest speakers should arrive soon. We'll see. Kind of nerve-wracking being all virtual. Can't see them.
easier.
Okay, good.
Well, I just wanted to try to get the first day. You know, I can.
Still.
Through the air, and it's still around. Sometimes it's really, so that all the visitors bumpers, so don't feel like it's places they don't do.
That's all it says here.
That doesn't look very good.
Really nothing. Send you some screenshots today, maybe back to my work laptop. How we use interfaces. And basically, they're struggling. They're like 9 interfaces chained together. But once you read them, you'll understand, right? Just to say,
Ooh, that's awful. I'm gonna turn it towards you guys.
If you make another class, like a file class.
Oof, why do you think it's so bad?
Still those interfaces, all those interfaces force you to have the same
Is
method.
it just that cheap?
Like the save method, the validate method. Right?
I got you.
They're kind of making the user conform, right? They're making the user like, hey, well, if you write your own save, you already have one.
Oh, you are so good. Thank you so
Write
much.
your own save in your own class. You have to have the same.
Cameras, I'm always just like, get him away from me.
I got you.
Okay, so we see. Are we picking on anybody too bad?
The details of how you perform and
Ethan
stuff.
can hide behind his monitor. If I turn it, is it gonna mess it all up?
Yeah, let's say.
I think that's a pretty good
You have to have
group shot.
Yeah, you have to have that method, right? And so let's say you have, if it's a routine function, right, well, eventually you're gonna have to have.
I'm gonna go ahead and admit all of you guys. There's Kelly, yay. Okay, so there's a flaw in the Zoom admission system. It wouldn't show me everybody. Wine. Oh. Hi, Kelly.
Hey.
How are you this morning? Bright and early?
Oh, indeed.
Do we have Chris?
Yeah, I just messaged him. He said he's on his way, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Virtual is a little nerve-wracking. I know you guys are used to it, but
Yeah. Yes and no. It's still always nerve-wracking.
comfy desk chair.
Say what?
Comfy desk chair. Thought it was
Oh,
you have adjustment.
no, this is not my desk chair. We don't use Zoom at work, so I'm using not my work device. So
Oh,
we use Zoom with our family and stuff, so we have a camera upstairs for this kind of stuff, so we're just using that.
awesome. Okay, well, you can sort of see everybody.
Yeah.
Let me let people in here.
see.
Well, I'll go ahead and introduce you, I think, and we'll get started. You guys, you have the Zoom session going. Do you want me to lock your computers, or are you good leaving them alone and stuff like that while you're watching? Because remember, we want to make sure that we're giving them our full attention. You've got your questions. They're excited about doing this. Right now, this wonderful gentleman is Kelly Stoops, and he's a former OTC grad, and he's going to be joined by Christopher Clark, who I have not met, who also is an OTC grad, so super exciting. We'll have them this morning with us. And Kelly, I was just wondering if, first of all, you'd just kind of introduce yourself a little bit, and maybe Chris will join us and can introduce himself before we get started with their questions, and then I'll just totally leave it up to you. So just yell if you need something, and I'll be right here. Thank you so much.
Sure. I was going to say, there he is. He walked in, but he, I'm not there.
That would be Aaron. Hey, Aaron.
So, like she said, my name's Kelly. I graduated OTC, goodness, 2 years ago, 3 now. And I went through the CIS program, just like what you guys are doing. I was a non-traditional student. I didn't go straight to OTC after college. I think I was 33 when I started going to OTC. So it was a little bit weird, a little bit different. It looks like maybe some of you might not be 18 and something similar. But I graduated OTC, and I actually was working at OTC for a little bit while I was there doing part-time work in the application development department over in Graff Hall. Just helping with the back end of, oh goodness, what's it called, Renee? The student program.
Canvas or Blackboard or?
So we did. I helped some with the transition from Blackboard to Canvas. I'm trying to think of it's not an ERP because it's not an enterprise system, but there's a student data and college data management system that that they use, that all the departments have different programs that tie into to get data about different students, the students that are enrolled in those departments and manage whatever they need. And so I got to help some with that. After I graduated, I started job hunting, and we'll get into this maybe later with some of the questions, but I did not get into the job hunt right away during my last semester, and that kind of bit me. So after I graduated, I started looking for a job, and the only one I could find was at a local company who will remain nameless, and it didn't go too well. I was there for a month, I think, and then I no longer was there. So a friend of mine who went to OTC also, I took 120 with him. I had a couple other classes. I think actually I took 120 with him, and then I also we kind of parted ways because I did a few other things, and he was doing some more remote classes than I was. But we stayed in touch, and he messaged me and let me know that he was working over at Jack Henry and that his team had some openings, and bugged me into applying over there. And I thought it was out of my league, so I kind of didn't take it seriously at first. And then he kept with me, kept getting at me, and then I ended up applying and getting started over there. And I've been there for the last almost 3 years. So let's just check on Chris real quick and see if
The way this admission system works, he could be sitting there waiting and me not see him, but I'm watching him and I don't see him.
being a software engineer doesn't mean software doesn't give you problems.
For sure.
Probably more so, in fact, I would say. So, Renee, is the microphone only up next to you, or are there others? Like, is it pick up the rest of the room as well?
I don't know. Somebody talked back there.
Hello.
Can you hear him?
Has no link. Okay.
It's pretty much just up here, but. Well, he's messaging.
Yeah, sorry. I guess he.
That's okay. No, you're working.
The link I sent him, I didn't send it.
Oh, well, that'll help. Sometimes that happens. I was just going to say Jack Henry does banking software. So that's why like Kelly can't use Zoom on a Jack Henry laptop and had to use his personal one and things like that because they have everything secured down pretty tight because they do banking software. So it's pretty high security.
Yeah, I think actually as a company, we do use Zoom. We use it for larger meetings with customers. Internally, we use Teams, and I just haven't had any kind of need for it, so I don't have it installed there.
Oh, great.
So Chris will be on here in just a second, and we can go through some of his story too.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was curious. I didn't know if we ask questions, if they can respond, or how do you guys?
We'll figure out a way for them to be able to. We'll make everybody stand up and shout to this mic. Through the masks and all, we're used to shouting.
Yeah. So you guys fully seated, or do you have any that are remote for this class? Or
through this class, Tiffany has a hybrid, but we don't have any online classes for C#2 anymore because people just had too much trouble getting through the content with an online format. I think hey, Chris.
Good morning.
Hi.
So, since Renee hasn't met Chris yet, I'll introduce him. So Chris is a software engineer on my team over at Jack Henry. And like she mentioned, he went to OTC a few years back and got his transfer degree. And he's done a few other things, but he ended up starting over at Jack Henry and getting involved there. And he's now one of our most experienced developers, heads up a lot of the nitty-gritty problems that we deal with in our team. So Chris, why don't you, so this is Renee, this is C#2 or 1? I forget.
C#2.
C#2. So this is the advanced, the end of C# for OTC class. And tell them a little bit about you.
Yeah, pretty much covered it all. I basically had a pretty easy time of finding a job afterwards. So I was fortunate in that regard. But other than that, it's been mostly Jack Henry. I had a quick, it was actually a tech support phone job, just doing like tech support for computers that I did while I was going to school, while I was finishing up. And I transitioned from that straight to Jack Henry. So it was a fortunate transition. But outside of that, you know, pretty normal story, honestly. Not a whole lot to share.
Yeah. So one thing that might be of note that I know Renee will be interested in, Chris, when you started at Jack Henry, you were not in a developer role, right?
That is correct. I basically, Jack Henry's talent acquisition team is actually pretty good about basically getting you in the door, maybe not necessarily in the place you wanted to be, but trying to get you there. So essentially what happened is I applied for a programmer role, and they called me maybe 2 or 3 weeks later and said, hey, we don't have any programmer roles that you're particularly wanting. This one that we think you would be good for requires a couple of years experience in the field. So they actually got me in as a Synergy installer, which is one of the Jack Henry products. And I basically started traveling to different banks and doing a really basic setup. It's basically just setting up Windows Server and some IIS services and getting a couple of web apps configured. But I started doing that and did that for a couple of years, actually promoted within that department And then I eventually moved to a better developer role than the one I applied for. So yeah, it was not what I wanted initially, but ended up being it for the better. So
Yeah.
So this would be like at banks that are customers of Jack Henry's that you would set up systems for?
that's correct. Yeah, we would basically just travel around, and you know, they would pay for an install of a particular product, and we would help them get all of their client machines set up. And it was mostly setup stuff, not much dev work. I did do a lot of SQL in that role, but
Cool.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris, did I send you the questions?
I have got them. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I didn't know if I failed on that one too. So, so I'll hop through. We'll start just going through what you guys already submitted, and then if based on what we talk about, you guys have other questions, just wave, raise your hand, wave, or whatever. We can shift gears, and if we can't see on the camera, Renee can, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, and they can use the chat too. So.
Yes, that's a thing. I forget that that's a thing. So, so we'll start with Stuart, and normally yeah. Normally I like to fiddle with people's names and make sure I get them right, but today we'll just start with this. Do you do self-learning or personal projects in your spare time? Oh, and Chris, I'll just we can alternate, or I'll answer it and then you answer it and then we'll move on.
Sure.
This is so weird for us not being there. Usually we're in the class and we can whisper. Absolutely not. I don't. I kind of do all that I want to do with that at work and want to get away from it when I get home. That's not the way everyone in our team is. I think it might be now. We've previously had a few people who were a lot more into it, and they would come to work and program all day and go home and program all night. But for me, personal projects anyways is a hard no. I still get ideas and things where I think, ooh, I want to do that. But, at this point, life is just busy enough. I don't have time for it. Self-learning a little bit, but not seriously. I should more than I do. So, Chris?
I will second that. Absolutely not. Now I try not to stagnate, and I don't think I do. But like Kelly said, especially in our field or in our particular roles, I should say, our department is very much not standard. What we run into and things we deal with are very wacky, and they require us to be almost daily online, digging around for weird solutions to weird problems. So we get a lot of exposure. We're not just sitting and writing the same paragraph of code every day. Almost every day is completely different. So I think a lot of that's satiated. If I was in a position where I was literally maintaining the same exact paragraph of code or doing the same principles over and over and over again, I probably would do more exploring because I would get bored. But we do not get bored in this role. And by the time I get home, I am like, yeah, my brain would like to veg out and not think anymore for the day. So.
And to give some context, I realize we kind of skipped over that. What our team does at Jack Henry, we're in a team called, or a division called Enterprise Conversion Services. So, Jack Henry does banking software, everything from what the guy at the bank uses to evaluate loans, to what the teller uses to keep track of your accounts, to online statements that you view when you look at your bank account, all that kind of stuff. But what we do is we convert data. So when a bank buys another bank that's on a different system, or when a bank decides to switch over to Jack Henry systems, or sometimes even just third party to third party, when a bank is changing, they'll give us their imaging data. So not the accounts like the actual numbers of money, but the check images, their PDF statements that are nice and pretty that you see at the end of the month, internal reports and things like that. They'll have terabytes and terabytes of that that they need converted from one format to go into another system, and that's what we do. So because of that, like Chris mentioned, we we don't do the same thing every day. It's still software engineering, it's still development, but there's a lot that is unforeseen, things that just come up that you've never seen before, or nobody on the team has seen before sometimes. And it's not at all what I thought it was getting into. I'll say that. So, but that's kind of where a lot of our answers are coming from. And part of what I like about getting to talk to OTCs, because when I was in your seat, I thought, oh, I'm going to go and work at some place and make this nice, neat, perfect production code, and I'm going to give it to someone, and they're going to package it and deploy it, and it's going to get sold, and we're going to have tickets and customers, and maybe like that's what some people end up getting into. Most of the jobs I have had have not been that. So one of the big messages I like to get across is just don't set your sights too small or too narrow. There's a lot of jobs that you can do with the skill set that you're learning. So in fact, my wife graduated with me there in CIS, and she works as an accountant. She uses her programming every day, but she doesn't work in the software field. So did you continue your education after OTC or at MSU? I did not. I graduated OTC. Like I said, I was non-traditional. I was already like 35 by then, I think. You know, I'm married, I have a daughter, I have a whole family outside of things. I did not have time for that. I purposefully went to OTC to change careers. So before I went to OTC, when I was growing up, I worked in construction in a family business. I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to be out in the elements. I had tried breaking into office work of some variety, doing you know, clerk work, or I worked, this could take forever. I worked in many fields trying to break into something where I could make a living. So I purposefully went to OTC to learn something that I could use to make a decent wage. And as soon as I got that done, that's what I wanted to do. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, mine was a basic 2-year OTC, and then I did end up going to MSU, but just for a BS, and that was it. So pretty plain Jane, to be honest.
So what are code comments like in the industry? Long, easy to read, or cryptic? I would amend those options to non-existent, broken, or cryptic. And they're usually all three. So like we mentioned, from our perspective, we're not dealing with production code. Oh,
So that's an excuse to not comment.
well, unfortunate. So that
I know
isn't.
it is. I know it is.
The fact that it's not production isn't. The fact that a large amount of the code we write, and then especially Chris deals with things. Why don't I let Chris tell you what he does? So what I do, sorry, I get talking. Yeah, at least in the products that I work in, the comments are usually not there because it is something that we're not going to reuse as much. So outside of, sometimes we'll have comments that are rather vague and just describe an entire method. So we rarely have, we'll either have comments that describe an entire method and just tell you what we're doing in there, if the name for some reason can't be something that's descriptive enough, or in certain problem areas inside of those methods, we'll have that. Now, some of the stuff that we get from our development teams that build some of the tools we use that we then customize, those will be a little bit more documented internally, but even then, they're not as commented as what you're doing, and that's a shame. And I wanted to change that when I started, and then they converted me.
Yeah, I pretty much have the exact same thing to say to that. They're normally not present, normally very cryptic, normally very hard to read if they're there. However, sometimes we run into the people who really do a good job of coding, and I have had that happen, and it is priceless. So it would definitely be one of the pieces of advice that I would pass on. is if you're in the habit of commenting your code thoroughly and well, keep that up, because it's more for yourself even too. Down the line, at least in our situation, we wind up revisiting code we wrote 2 or 3 years earlier pretty often, and trying to figure out what you were doing and why is almost impossible without good commenting. And I wish I could say that I've seen better, but even in production code, like Kelly said, ours is more custom, but I've had a chance to look through several of our production classes for our products, and they're not different. There's stuff from the 90s and comments where people are like, not sure what this does, don't alter lines 580 through 590, you know, which I guess if those weren't there, it'd be even worse off. So, but yeah, comment. It's definitely a good move.
Yeah. Chris, why don't you take the next set first, and I can follow up.
Sure thing. Isaac, does our position in our company allow for industry growth? Yeah, I think so. So we've already kind of mentioned what the position is. I'm sure you guys have extrapolated, if nothing else. Jack Henry's mostly banking-oriented software. It has several facets of that within the company. You know, we've got, gosh, I think last time I checked, it was 16 products that were publicly available. I'm sure it's grown. It's kind of always moving around. We're getting into the app marketplace at this point as a company. And as far as transitioning is concerned, or pivoting, within the company, there's a myriad of opportunities, and those kind of show up at all times. Typically, if you're dissatisfied with your role, those are the people I've noticed who've done the most hopping around. But as far as the industry itself, and moving around within it, yeah, I mean, Jack Henry's certainly got a good repertoire and a good, can't think of the word. It's got a good presence around here. So several of the people that I know that are in affiliated fields have asked me, multiple times if I wanted to start working with them. And I feel like it'd be very easy to find another job, and kind of move forward if I had a direction I wanted to proceed in. So, but I'm happy here at this point. So, Kelly?
Yeah, I would echo those. I mean, personally, so Chris has been at Jack Henry a lot longer than I have. I've only been there for almost 3 years. And for me, it's been kind of head down. I haven't really thought any about moving. Like Chris said, I'm kind of happy with where I'm at. Now things change, teams change, companies change. Obviously, look at what we're all dealing with at the moment. The world changes. But
Seriously,
at least as far as that, yeah, I think Jack Henry is known, and it's not just local. Jack Henry has, I think before COVID, and I don't know if they've actually made any adjustments to this or what they will, but we had, I think, 28 or 30 locations across the US.
64, actually.
So, like I mentioned to my brother in Dallas that I was going to start working at Jack Henry. He goes, "Oh, yeah, that's just down the road here," because he has one right next to him. And he's in software, so it's a well-known thing. So like he said, if you were to have a position at a company like Jack Henry, it's not just us, but O'Reilly's as well, that can help you if you want to be able to move to another spot in the industry where you kind of already have now I can't find the word, but when you go to talk to someone else about a job, they already know you're from a reputable place. There we go, reputation.
That was the one I was looking forward to. Thanks. Yeah, so the next question is kind of related to that. Do you have a clear path to move down if you want to move up in the company? And yeah, absolutely. The good managers that I've had have been very proactively communicative regarding that, where they're constantly bugging me about what my plan is and where I would like to see myself go. I've had some not so good managers that don't really care, and I've had to kind of keep my target set. But there's absolutely a clear path, and it's mostly centered around A, the role you're in, or B, your communication of where you want to be in. In our position currently, our obvious trajectory is, doing software engineer work and then stepping up into an advanced or a senior role there, and then stepping up into the actual development group. And then from there, possibly pivoting into a different department's development group, which would be a little bit bigger, and doing our, product development instead of internal product development. And then we've had 2 developers now become CEOs. So they typically have good understanding and experience of multiple facets of the company to be eligible for executive positions when they get a little older. And most of our executives have been pretty well-rounded people who have had their feet in many of the different Jack Henry pies. So short answer, yes, there's absolutely a good path within this company at least.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is what Chris mentioned is communication. No matter what company you're with or what team you're on, learning to communicate with your manager and tell them, it's not wrong or bad. Maybe the first week that you're there, don't, but it's a good thing to tell your manager what you want to do in the future. That classic interview question of where do you see yourself in 5 years? That doesn't end when you get hired. Good managers want to help you progress. Even if nothing else, they need someone to take their spot so that they can go up, So good managers want to help you achieve your goals. And so that's something, learn to think about that, of where you do actually want to go so you can communicate to them, because they have the knowledge of, okay, so if you want this job, then you're at A, and to get to Z, you need to do this, this, and this, and that'll help you get there.
And it's also been my experience that if you stay in the same spot, or if you don't speak up in those moments, they have no problem with leaving you in the same spot. We've got several people they're happy with their job and they don't want to move up. And we've got a couple people even on our team who've been there over a decade, and they don't want to move up. They're happy in their position. There's cost of living and regular yearly raises happen, and they're good where they are. So definitely, if you do want to move up, make that known. Don't put that task on someone else of assuming that you want that, because not everybody does. And I definitely saw progress when I started speaking up about that, and not in a needy, entitled way or anything. I literally just had a kid. I went to my boss and was like, "Hey, I'm an idiot. Now I have a kid who's depending on me, and I think I'm kind of an idiot. What do I do?" And they basically gave me some opportunities to start moving around, and that just kind of went from there. And then I've worked very hard since then. So next question is, how much effort is put in to maintain skills of constantly updated industry field outside of work? This is kind of our question from earlier. Not as much as I would like to say. Again, we do so much wacky stuff within our job that I just don't have that drive outside of work. Now, I think if I were planning to apply for a different position somewhere else, like, locally O'Reilly's, or maybe even not locally, like, Google or something, like let's say I was going to push into that, I would definitely do some polishing up. And I actually, Jack Henry does pretty good with continuing education stuff. And at multiple times throughout my career here, I've had access to online learning that's, paid for online learning through one place or another. And whenever I transitioned into my current role, I took several development classes just to polish back up on, coding in general. It had been a few years. And so I would say, to correctly answer your question, it oscillates. Sometimes there's a little more effort than others. Currently, it's not much, to be honest. So,
yeah, and I would, like he said, we talked a little bit about outside of work, but inside of work, there's more than none. There's less than what I hear is at some places. Some places it's 1 day a week of learning to stay on the razor edge, because that's where the products they're developing are. In our team, we're using so technology wise, like we're using WPF, we're not doing UWP programs. And so it's not like we need to be on the cutting edge of things. We do need to stay current. You know, when a new version of C# comes out, hey, cool, now I can use these tuples differently or something like that and find more efficient ways. But inside work is something to think about too, that you'll get opportunities to do. So, so next person is Richard. What do you feel like Jack Henry and Associates' biggest challenges with the current code base? So their code base is vast, and you know, for relatively obvious security reasons, we only have access to what we need to. And so I've only seen a very small sliver of that. Chris has had more experience, like he said, to opportunity to see more of it. The current code base that I work in, I would say our biggest challenge is one of two things. I would say either maintenance, as in like keeping things organized in our code base, in our version control system. You know, so we've got, our team is like 11 people, and we come from different backgrounds. Some people have come to the team never using versioning control before. Some people have used different products than what we use. And so like getting all on the same page so that everybody's doing stuff in the same way and then it's nice and neat and organized, that's a challenge. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge. And then the other one I would say is testing. It's something that we didn't touch on in school, was testing, like integration testing or unit testing. And when you get into the software world professionally, it's a big thing. And that can be really intimidating when someone's like, so tell me, you know, how, like an interview question of how do you like to write your unit tests? I don't know. I know unit testing is a thing. In our code base, we have very little of that, and it would be probably, that's a challenge that we have.
Yeah, I would actually just second that. Testing is definitely a giant one, and I also was undereducated on it. And it became a huge thing that I was just not aware of, and it turned into a trial by fire situation. Outside of that, just general knowledge of defunct or older code is another big barrier. We run into programs that began in the 90s, a lot of C++ in them, and a lot of people don't understand C++ these days. I don't know that there's much you can do in that regard, because I don't think it's good advice to tell you guys to dive into C++. But that's definitely another barrier there. Next question is from Garrett, and it's, what's the biggest difference between the work and code you did in your college studies versus actually working on the job? I would say just having a clear direction to go. And what I mean by that is when you do an assignment for university or something like that, you've got very direct directions. You know, it's code this, accomplish this, use these principles. In the professional world, at least in my experience, it's you're at point A and you need to get to point Q, and how in the heck are you going to do that? You have no idea. So there's a lot of critical thinking involved in figuring out what types of code solutions you can apply to the situation to get yourself where you need to go. And it's actually the thing I've come to love most about coding. So I'm happy about that, but that's definitely the biggest difference, is having that lack of direction and just getting plopped in. And it's like, hey, like Kelly said earlier, here's 16 million embedded TIFF files with old style JPEG image compression. We need them to be PDFs and have an accompanying database. Go. And you're just like, wait, what? So yeah, that's definitely the biggest difference in my hand. Kelly, I'm assuming you're probably in the same arena, but.
Yeah, there's that. I think it's weird because there's a lot of that, and shockingly, there's a lot that's similar. But I would say like getting direction from people who don't know programming. So, you know, when you're at a business, not everybody above you is a programmer. You know, your manager may be a great manager, but not know anything really about programming. Now, so for instance, I work for a manager who's, well, he's our manager still. He's incredibly intelligent. He understands our process extremely well. He's worked in the team for many years, but as far as writing actual code, that's not his thing. He didn't go to school for that. He hasn't learned it. He's technically capable, but he's not a programmer. So there's a challenge there sometimes in what's possible, how much work is this, and things like that. And I think that's probably one of the biggest differences is when you get an assignment at school, it's a measured amount of work. Like your instructor knows roughly how long this should take you or what is involved in it. When you get an assignment professionally, you might be asked, hey, I need this. How long do you think it'll take you? You know, what learning to kind of figure that out is, I still don't, I'm not good at that. So that's probably one of the bigger differences. Now I am going to butcher your name. I'm sorry. Someone correct me because I want to get this right. Kirte? No?
Here,
Kirt. Mr. Arnold.
too easy, I can't do it.
What were the first few weeks of your job like? Terrifying. Like I said, I thought that Jack Henry was out of my league. In fact, when I started going to OTC, someone like family or friend asked me, they're like, oh, cool, you think, you know, like, so you'll go work at some place like Jack Henry? And I was like, no. That's, you know, that was like someone asking me if I was going to go work at Google. So I kind of had it built up in my mind to be something it's not. And so I was really terrified. Plus, as you recall, I mentioned the job I had just before this, I was at for a month. And then, so that really set me off. And I needed this job to work out because I had missed the boat on like all the hiring that goes on in the spring. That's actually before graduation, not after. And so I was really nervous, but outside of just my personal experience, the first few weeks of the job were a lot of training because, so not every company is like this. The other ones I've worked for, training is, you know, don't touch people, don't do donuts in the parking lot and come to work with clothes on, you know. But at Jack Henry, it's a large company, and so there's a lot more to go over. It's a lot more regimented. You know, the new employee orientation is like 3 days long. You've got a million things to read and acknowledge, policies of, you know, don't steal our code and don't go fraternizing with the customer and things like this. You know, there was so much of that I think it was almost 2 weeks before I really wrote code. So it was kind of different. Chris?
Yeah, I would agree completely. Terrified is definitely the best way to put it. I had some serious imposter syndrome going on as well, and I've come to realize you just have that. And it's because, you know, whether you have coding experience or not, or you feel confident in your coding abilities or not, rarely are you going to find a job where the one requirement and only requirement is coding. They're all going to be coding, and then, you know, preferred 2 to 5 years in applicable field, preferred project management experience, you know, you're going to have 2 or 3 things that you're just not feeling up to snuff on. So it was definitely terrifying, and definitely just have to kind of step in and start confidently moving as best you can. But they all feel that way for a while. Is kind of what I noticed. I kind of wish I had known that, to be honest. Mary, what does a typical workday look like for you? Yeah, I'll stay pretty much on the surface here, but we basically log in or drive in the past. Now we just log in. But we would get online. I typically have got just an Outlook set up with a calendar. I throw things on the calendar just to remember to do, not necessarily meetings. So I'll always look at my calendar first thing. I'll typically hop in and look at a queue of issues that my team and related teams put into me. I kind of handle oddball conversion issues, whereas Kelly actually does the conversions themselves. I handle the ones that blow up or break or need some kind of custom work done. So I just log in, grab my next item on the list. Typically it's something like an institutions wanting tax IDs inserted into their documents, and maybe I have to reach out to an AS400 systems database and pull in tax IDs and marry it up to their CIF numbers. And so I'll write a custom script to connect and do that, or any various type of things. But most of it's just done kind of in a list fashion like that, where I've got the next thing on my list. Occasionally my boss will hit me up and be like, these guys are really angry. Please to get this one done today. And I'll get a new thing. But it's pretty straightforward as far as just kind of working down the never ending pile. Kelly, yours is a bit different, so I'll kind of toss that over to you for that.
I muted myself because I'm coughing. Sorry, I have reflux, so at least with mute, you don't have to listen to me. Chris and I work on the same team, but we have different roles on the team. So Chris is knocking out the stuff that we've all screwed up, and I'm busy screwing stuff up for Chris to fix later. So because context before answer, because my work is more high level assignment, I'll have between 8 to 12 projects at any given time. And sometimes more than that, and sometimes a little less than that. It fluctuates. But those projects, each one of those will be anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 months long. So because of that, because they're so large and varied, I'm not as organized as Chris is, because it's harder for me to have just a list of this. And so I, like Chris said, I log in. The number one thing I do every morning is, and sometimes I do this on my phone before I log in, is just make sure no one's looking for me. Did something blow up overnight that the boss needs an answer, to talk to the customer about this? Or did someone else have a problem with their conversion and someone on our team, and they have a question for me, looking for a little help, something like that. But outside of that, sorry, dog. I try and figure out what is the biggest fire at the moment, what's the highest priority, and start tackling that. And then several times a day, I'll just kind of take a break from that and kind of, bring my head up for air and make sure, again, am I keeping up with my communication? Someone looking for me? Does somebody need something? Is there a meeting coming up? I still use Outlook for some things like that, but my calendar's less scheduled than like what Chris described. So, and also there's the personal side to it. I take some time and take a walk, go outside for a minute, just get a breath of fresh air. When we were at the office, we're next to a park. Several of us would just head off and take a walk for 15 minutes and come back into the office. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's pretty busy, but also not busy. It's the weirdest thing to describe, because of the way the company we work for puts a lot of power in the hands of the managers and lets them run their teams the way they want to within boundaries. And our manager is really nice in that he, if you're getting your work done and you're not missing and no one can't find you, things like that, he wants you to be an adult and do your own thing, So that allows for us to kind of have some flexibility. And hey, I got a haircut on my way into work this morning, so I wasn't here at 8 a.m. on the dot, or I've got, I'm leaving to go do this. So typical workday is not as structured for me as in some companies. I know, like, O'Reilly is big on butts and seats. You don't do those things there, so it depends on where you're at.
What made you want to go into this line of work, and did it turn out like you thought it would? And then I'm going to actually roll this next question in because it'll be kind of affiliated. What do you think are some of the pros and cons of this line of work? So it was kind of common sense for me to end up here. as a kid, I loved video games and computers. I was in a family of people who did not love or understand video games or computers. So I constantly had a PC that I was tinkering with, and consoles, and just different things where I was always immersed in technology, always fascinated by it. And I kind of became the kid who was called on by every distant relative to fix their router when it went out, or to help them with their TV because the settings wouldn't work, and set up their cable, and basically anything tech. So, you know, as I went into school, and you're doing the whole decide what you want your life to be thing, which is a very loaded question most times. It was common sense for me to try and go into a tech field, because that was the thing that everyone called on me for. So it seemed like one of the applicable talents I had. So that's definitely why I ended up in this field. Pros and cons of it. Pros, you're always on the edge of tech, even if it's not professionally. When you're in an affiliated field, you're around people like Kelly, who have to have the new electronic bike when it comes out, and you're like, what's an e-bike? And you know, you're constantly immersed in kind of tech and tech talk and people who are interested in tech. So that's definitely a giant pro. You stay up to snuff on coding and things like that, like we mentioned earlier. As far as cons are concerned, I definitely have some concerns about screen time, things like that. Because, you know, when you're already kind of a geek, you already maybe play a lot of video games or do a lot of coding in your private time, or, you know, you're already staring at a screen in all of your free time. To go into an 8-hour day job and stare at a screen for those 8 hours, and then get home and put on Netflix for the 2 hours while you eat, and then after that get on a video game for 4 hours, or I kind of have concerns about my poor eyes and just staring at screens all the time. So that would definitely be one of the cons. Another con, I don't struggle with this, but I've seen people, there's not a lot of person-to-person interaction, especially on a customer level, in a lot of these programming fields. So a lot of the programmers and developers I work with have kind of lost their ability to communicate with customers, or to feel confident in communicating with customers. So that's definitely another con, is it's kind of, you know, and akin to the current times, kind of isolated. So.
Yeah, I would say I kind of had a similar thing with Chris on going into this line of work, where growing up, I was always interested in computers and tech, and we had so I'm old, sorry. We had a computer that was, ooh. And I wasn't anything special, but I was just always fiddling with it because no one else was, and I was interested in it. So that made me want to get into this line of work. But like I mentioned, I did other things because I had major imposter syndrome. I thought going into this line of work was impossible, so I never really pursued it. And so it didn't turn out like I thought it would, because I really thought that wasn't reasonable. As far as when I got older and understood a little bit more, even then, when I started going to OTC, my first semester was in the nursing department, or nursing program. I didn't think that there was a way, I thought getting the CIS degree was still folly. My wife had to talk me into it. In fact, she baited me into it because she started the program herself, and then I transferred to join her. So I really struggled with that, but I don't know, it turned out to be better than I thought it would, which, you know, pros and cons. Pros, I would say, like Chris said, it's neat to get to kind of hear and see and touch and be involved in techie stuff if you're interested in techie stuff, which not everybody who's a programmer is, you know. One of my wife's best friends, she works for Duck Creek up in Bolivar. She's an amazing programmer, and she's a farm girl. She does not like computers. So, you know, it's not all of us are like that, but that's a pro for me, like what Chris said. One of the other pros is, depending on where you're working, the flexibility that comes along with it. You know, if you're in retail, you have to be in a store to sell things, to do your job in brick and mortar retail. That's just part of it. With this, there can be some flexibility. This kind of goes into the next question after this, but you know, you can work from home some. You can do, your work isn't as dependent on the weather and the customer being available at that moment. And so those things are nice. Cons, I would say, depending on your personality, con for me is, like we've talked about several times, imposter syndrome. You never feel, perhaps I never feel like I'm on top of things. And because software and technology are constantly moving, if you're not learning that at that speed, it can make you feel like you're falling behind and you're not able to do your job well. You know, I don't learn how to use a lot of it, but I stay up to date with what's going on and developments just through reading news and stuff because it's interesting. But that is the pace at which things move. Even the people who are working on the cutting edge can't keep up with it. So that can be a con.
One thing I want to ask you guys that you're not thinking about is your pay a pro?
I debated on whether or not to say that for pros and
I think
cons.
it's important to students.
Yeah, honestly, that's a big pro for me. And one of the reasons I went into this line of work is I knew that, and that's one of the reasons I started looking at nursing. I was kind of interested in it, but I knew that even at the entry level, I'd be able to afford to live on it.
Right.
You know, and you know, of course, you hear about people that work for Google and Apple and make 6 figures or more and all this stuff. But even at just at a basic level and at a local level, without having to travel for work or relocate, I mean, you can make a decent living. And that's a pro for me in that it affords me the flexibility in my personal life. You know, I'm not well off, but I can not stress about paying my bills. Like I'm not trying to figure out how I'm going to keep the lights on and feed myself at the same time.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Especially to students.
Yeah, that's honestly, like it's been 3 or 4 years since I was a student, and you kind of forget about that a little bit.
Forget about that.
Instead of struggling to pay,
and a pen.
so, yeah, instead of struggling to pay tuition, now I'm struggling to pay student loans, but well, not at the moment. But yeah, the pay in the field in general is a big pro on choosing this. But Aaron, how did COVID affect your work environment? I know some programmers get to work exclusively from home to begin with. If you worked in the office, how did you adjust to working from home? Was it harder for you to stay on task? So obviously, the big thing, like COVID completely changed our work environment. Before COVID, we were in the office every day with the ability to work remotely occasionally. You know, if you're not feeling well, don't come into the office. Or if you're getting a package you need to sign for, don't come, you know, you can work from home. So, and some of the people in our department would have, say, like 1 day a week that they worked from home. Now we're all, as of March, I think 11th, all of us, unless you have a job that requires you physically to be on site, like plugging a drive into a rack, we're all remote. So adjusting to working from home, honestly, it's worked out for me way better than I thought it would. I always thought I would never be able to do that. You know, growing up, I dealt with having ADD. I still deal with having ADD. And so staying focused when I'm by myself or when I'm in my own environment has been difficult for me in the past. But honestly, it's easier for me to stay on task at this point. I love our team and I love how our team is very social. You know, if I have a problem, I get up out of my desk, I walk over to Chris's and I say, hey man, I'm stumped. I don't know how to deal with this. And he'll say, oh yeah, I've seen this, or no, but so-and-so has, and I'll go to their desk. But with all that going on, plus being in a busy office where there are other stuff going on, that can be a distraction as well. So for me, it's been easier for when I need to unplug and just kind of focus. I can stay on task a little bit better. So What about you, Chris?
I'll echo that. Staying on task is actually easier, and that was surprising. I tend to get more done too, which was also surprising. I would not have anticipated that. Pre-COVID, I feel like I really always wished for something like that, where I was like, I wish I could just stay home. I'm just on a computer anyways. This is so silly. But I honestly kind of hate it. I hate how much I hate it, but I do hate it. I think I need to be around people a little more. And I underestimated how much I liked that. So I've gotten to the point where I'm absolutely dreadfully tired of it, but it's possible and it works. And I'm able to stay on task. I've had to kind of up my social interaction in my personal life just to, not be completely alone all the time. So, Ethan, what are the qualities of a successful team and or project leader? I can answer both of those. Priority number one, in my opinion, is communication. Kelly just mentioned us kind of spider webbing off of each other. You're not going to have all the answers, and neither is the guy sitting next to you, but between a group of you, you absolutely will have all the answers, or at least know how to get to them. So communication is the biggest thing to me in that regard. Now, I would also kind of tie commenting into that, because that is technically communication, but having a good team that comments their codes makes things that much easier. Project leader, aside from just communication, I would say, like Kelly mentioned about our manager earlier, somebody who's just plugged in and able to understand what you're doing, even if they don't understand coding. So, a good project leader, just having that awareness of what's going on and not just depending on the people below them to handle it. Yeah, Kelly, anything to add there?
I echo those. I would add the things that I think take those to the next notch is human interest, especially as a team leader, being interested enough in your team members or employees, whatever, to, it doesn't mean that you have to be buddy and spend all your time with them, but having a human interest in them as a person. So like at Jack Henry, on a corporate level, there's an interest in taking care of their employees, because having thousands of employees that are just dead zombies inside because they're grinding away at their job is not going to be as productive. So that trickles down, and that's what I've seen is the best team leaders are ones who actually take that to heart. And it's not that they're at my desk every day asking how I am and what's going on at home, but it's more that they care about us as humans and not just employees. So when I'm having a rough day, there's been a couple of times where I'm like, hey man, listen, I've got this and this and this, and I'm sorry. And they're like, you know what? Just disappear, go away, go be a human. Don't need to be a 100% employee at this moment. So having that human interest will make you a better team and project leader, just in having empathy. There, I could have summed all that up into empathy.
What strengths do you think are most important in a developer or another relevant IT position? Obviously, the vanilla things of knowing how to read and write code properly. That's a giant one. But outside of the basic ones, I would say one of the bigger things, which I wouldn't have foreseen, is the ability to think outside of the box. I think coding kind of began that way anyways, but as humans have kind of locked it down and come up with practical ways of teaching it and organizing it, it's kind of lost that for a lot of people, where they just read exactly how it's supposed to happen. And I think the moments I've been most proud of in my career with coding has been the moments where I applied one or two or three principles of code to a weirdly unrelated situation that you wouldn't have thought it would have handled, and got it to work. And a lot of our position requires that kind of outside of the box thinking, but it's just been the most beneficial thing to me, is learning how to apply code into situations that I wasn't taught about when I was taught the code. if that makes sense. And that's kind of an abstraction, and it's hard to communicate, but that's my answer. Kelly?
I especially the second half of that I agree with. So programming is kind of, it's not just a skill, it's a way of thinking. Programming is problem solving, and learning to apply those patterns and things is huge. So I would say that learning how to learn, not necessarily how to learn a new skill, but learning how to find the answer to the problem that's in front of you. In class, most of the time, hopefully, that's available in a textbook. Sometimes not. Learning how to use Stack Overflow. And not just Stack Overflow, but Stack Overflow as a concept. What I mean is learning how to search for the answer on the internet and weed out the 99% of garbage and find the one person who's described, what's actually going on, and a reasonable way for you to do it, not just the nitpicky, well, you should rewrite that to look more like this because I say so. So learning how to learn and learning how to work together in class. That's one of the big differences in school and professional. Is in school, obviously, you need to do your own work so that your work can be graded as yours. You still have team projects or group projects, but you get 5 or 6 of those in a semester. In the professional world, if you're working for the same company, you're all on the same team. Doesn't matter. The goal is for the company to succeed, not you as an individual. So learning to really use your other team members as a resource to help the whole team succeed is huge.
What online resources do you use to help you do your job at Jack Henry and Associates? Kelly just kind of answered this. Stack Overflow is a giant one. Really anything you can find that, like Kelly said, where somebody knew how to articulate the question and then answered it practically with examples. Another giant resource, it's technically, well, I guess now it technically is online, which we kind of mentioned earlier, Teammates. More often than not, I'll try and find something online, but if I'm in a hurry, if it seems like something that we should have run into by now and I'm just seeing it for the first time, I absolutely shoot a flare up to coworkers and be like, hey, has anyone had PDFs do this when you try and convert them? What's happening? And I don't think there's any shame in spreading that around and asking questions to the people around you. We all do it to each other, and it's supremely beneficial. And I've actually was around when this team wasn't communicative, and it's worlds better when people are willing to share that knowledge. So definitely just Google and Stack and .NET Pearls, things like that. But Teammates, the giant one.
So how hard is the work at your job? This is where I'm glad that Chris was able to be here instead of Matt, because Matt's my boss now. I would love to say it's not hard. Some days it's not hard at all, but honestly, it's hard. I am the type of person where I will stress out over things I don't need to, and so sometimes it's crippling. But I feel like that's the outlier. In general, it is hard because, like Chris has mentioned, it's not clear cut, and sometimes you've got problems with questions with no answers. But
part of that's your ADD though too, don't you think, Kelly, that you
yeah,
actually no matter where you were working when things, because that's your awesome personality, excitement.
Yeah, so that's a really big question, and I would almost, if we had more time, I would ask for that to be narrowed down some. But I would say the work, so the actual programming, let's say that, it would be nearly impossible if I was doing it by myself, because like Chris said, no one person has the answers. But because we have a team that's willing to work together, it's actually a lot easier, because when I hit a wall, I know who to ask, and I go to that person. And that's not always the same person. I'm not being abstract on purpose here. Like I know who to go ask, or to find out who does know the answer and get them to help us with it. And at that point, it becomes accomplishable, and that makes it not as hard.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, actually. I would say that's about right.
It's as hard as you make it.
Yeah. And really knowing when to draw the line. I think that's the hard part, actually, is when do you ask for help? When do you shoot a flare? And if you're early on, that's the imposter syndrome Kelly and I keep referencing. One of the biggest things that people do, and I, myself included, you start a job, you feel like maybe you're a little underqualified, and thank God they let me in, and hopefully I'm not found out for how little I actually know. And you get in and you start working and you hit a roadblock and you're like, crap, I don't know how to make this work. And your first instinct is like, I wonder if someone can tell me. And then you're like, no, they're going to know. They're going to know that I don't know what I'm doing. So you want to figure it out on your own. So then you're Googling like mad and looking around trying to find this answer that could easily just be, you know, hey, I've never done this before. Can you show me how to do this? And there's no shame in saying that. And I think if I could go back in time and talk to myself starting out, I'd be like, hey, put your pride down. And like when you get stuck, just say you don't know what you're doing and ask for help, because nobody wants to see you fail. They all want you to be a good choice and a good hire for the department. And learning how to ask questions, that's the hard part. Learning to set your fear of looking inept down to ask those questions, that's the hard part. Coding, if you get through college, you'll have the tools you need to handle that side of it, in my opinion. So.
And I would tack onto that, just as a brief cautionary tale. We've actually had people in the past work for our team who they got let go because they weren't able to do the job because they wouldn't ask for help. You know, they were secure in their mind of the skill that they had as a programmer, and because they were not able to recognize that they needed to get help and ask questions, and they just kind of did their own thing, it made them not a usable employee. So how was the interview process? So big caveat here that the interview process has changed drastically since I have done it. The interview process now, I'm pretty sure, is kind of bog standard business interview, where you have 2 or 3 people in with you, and they're going to ask you mostly non-technical questions. And then they have a second phase of the interview now that is almost like a test, a verbal test, a programming test. So just due to various HR related things, we on our team don't have an actual programming test. Now, when I went through, we did. So for me, the interview process was, I had after I sent in my application, I had a phone interview, and it was very brief. It was just, you know, are you actually, you know, this person? And so then we went in. My in-person interview was 2 managers and one of the more technical, more experienced people on our team there. And they just kind of took turns asking questions. It was mostly standard interview questions, you know, tell me about a time that you failed in a technical perspective and how did you deal with that, you know. And then I went in and met the rest of the team. And that's part of one of the big things that we no longer do, unfortunately. It was kind of like a group team interview where they could ask me questions and the idea was to get to know them and see if, you know, will you fit with the team? But that's not something you can action. That's a lawsuit. Liability. So that, and I guess the big part of the interview process that I skipped over there was they gave me a test. It was a C# file, and it had a little text readme with explicit instructions. And they had 3 different classes, and then those got called into a program.cs, and you had to you were only allowed to write code in that one file to fix what was happening. So they had 3 things that were broken and you had to fix them. And that was really neat. And I will say, we've talked about commenting some. When I got feedback on that, first of all, almost no one ever turned that in perfect. The goal wasn't for it to be perfect. The goal was for them to see how you program. So even though we may not do those anymore, a lot of places will give you tests like that. Keep in mind the goal is to see how you program, see how you think, see what the code you write looks like. And I got feedback back that the comments that I had in there were a big factor. Because I commented line by line and explained, I want to do this thing. And then I had the code that did that thing. And then the next line, I would have, I would be explaining my thought process with comments. And then they saw my coding style as well. So that was basically the interview process I went through.
Yeah, I went through the exact same one Kelly's talking about. Most of it's defunct now. They don't do it that way anymore. And now you're better off, in my opinion, looking at some targeted selection interview questions online, which are, like Kelly said, it's, what did you learn from a mistake and why? And what did you do to fix it? And it's a lot of really generic questions like that these days, at least in our particular company. So,
yeah. What is your work schedule? We've skated around this some, and again, I'm glad Matt's not here. No. Because of my team, my work schedule is very flexible. Honestly, I log on every morning. My mental deadline is 9 a.m. Almost everyone else is on at 8, but I log on at 9 and I log off between 4 and 5. It just depends if I've gotten everything done that day. So I kind of make the joke that I start on Eastern time and quit on Pacific. No, that's backwards. I start on Pacific and quit on Eastern time. Yeah. But there's some nights where I'm on until 7. There's some mornings I'm on at 7:30. It's very flexible, but the core idea is the basic 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Yeah, and that's the same on my end. It's the basic Monday through Friday work hours, and then occasionally I have a customer that doesn't want to do an update because they're scared it's going to affect production. So they want to do it Saturday at 6 p.m. And I make myself available for those times. And Jack Henry's really good about making themselves understand when I need time. So it's a balance, but it's definitely just a standard 40-hour week for the most part. So, what do you think was the difference between your resume and or job application and other applicants that landed you an interview for your current job? Oh man, that probably varies at different time periods and through different people, obviously. But I would say, as far as the resume is concerned, really take that time to try and word yourself as eloquently as possible. Now, I don't mean have a thesaurus out and sound like the architect on the Matrix movies or anything like. But I know when I've been a part of looking through resumes, and I was a manager prior to this role. And the ones that are just written poorly, where they didn't care about punctuation or articulating a sentence properly, they just got set to the side immediately, because it was just like, you don't even care. You don't even care enough to make this sound good. And that's definitely the first thing. And I know that seems so elementary, but man, there's so much there. As past that, I think the other things were, my resume, I really tailored to each position I was applying for. And I'm sure everyone does that, but, if it was a development role, I'm going to talk a lot about school. I'm going to talk a lot about, different things that have required development. If it wasn't, and in many cases it wasn't, because like Kelly said, sometimes you just need money and you need it soon, and you may not have a good development opportunity at that time. So I went for a project manager role at one point that I got, and I focused on communication, and instead of focusing on my coding, it was the ability to complete tasks and what I pulled from the coding world that applied to project management, and I really tailor it down to the job I'm going for. And I think that's a huge thing. And then another weird gotcha, this is more interview based than resume or job app, but put in your 2 weeks always. My last manager, he basically would get people in, and there may be 3 people who were qualified that we liked, and it was, hey, when can you start? And the people that were like, oh, I can start whenever you want, he passed on them because he was like, they'll burn us just like that later on. So he always stuck with the person that was like, I can't start for 2 or 3 weeks. I have to let my other employer know. So a big gotcha that you might not see coming because you want to look eager. Always put in your 2 weeks. And yeah, Kelly, I'll pass that off to you. I kind of went too long there. Sorry.
So I would say two things for this job. Two things that I had that set me aside were, I don't want it to sound like it's all about who you know, because it's not, but I would say references. So in this case, I had a reference that was on the team. Now, that's kind of a unicorn story, but the point about that is I made that reference at school. It was someone that I had gone to school with, and I had other contacts in the community by going to the .NET groups, by doing hackathons and things like that. And so in this case, I had that reference, but at other places, I would have had a different reference based on that kind of involvement. So don't neglect your relationships with your classmates. Think of them as teammates in this point, you know. So references can be a huge help because personally, I hate that idea that it's about who you know, that can be a way to get a job. I want everyone to be treated equally and not be about, oh, I happen to just have this relative. But to an extent that's not unethical, that still comes into play. And I think the other thing that set me apart for this one was experience. Now, I mentioned that I worked at OTC part-time doing programming, and then I had another job programming for a month that didn't work out. I didn't put that job on my resume. I read it very carefully to make sure that I wasn't lying, because the resume, I mean, resume is a resume. The application, I think I put it on the application because it specified name all the places you've worked. But I had something, just something. It wasn't impressive, it wasn't awesome, but I had something that showed I had some capability to work in the software field. And it was brief. I mean, it was part-time working at a local community college. That's nothing to most people. And you'll notice, like in the advisory board for OTC, Jack Henry's not there. Jack Henry doesn't court OTC students like some of the other companies in the area do, which, personal bias, I think that's a shame. I think they should more, but they just don't have to. You know, the applicants come to Jack Henry, they don't have to go look for them in general. But yeah, references and experience, and like Chris said, with wording yourself eloquently, whatever experience you do have, even if it's not as a software development, find something, if you can, in your last few jobs that relates to programming. It's not going to be writing code maybe, but it's problem solving. It's a task that you had that makes you good at customer service or things like that. So I think those are big.
You mentioned, Kelly, too, that you worked really hard to preload that resume, going to all those user groups and different things like that while you were a student to make sure that you had those credentials. So that preloading is pretty important, making sure that you've done the right things to fill up that resume while you've got a chance and making those connections, because you really worked hard at that.
Yeah,
and it was important.
I know Ms. Riley will love this plug. I did not want to do Skills USA, which maybe they're not even doing that right now. I did not want to do Skills USA. I thought it was not for me. You know, it's mostly about scholarships for younger students, but it was a requirement, and I drudged through it, and I got really frustrated actually because for Skills, there's only so many that can go to do the programming, and I felt personally like I was perhaps more skilled than the people who got to go do programming at that, just because I had more experience at it. But I didn't win Code Golf, and so I didn't get to go for that. So I had to do customer service instead. So I went to Skills USA for customer service for my programming degree. And, you know, there were more than a few moments that I was kind of not thrilled about that. But you know what, that's life. But then I went and applied at Jack Henry, where they have this huge internal focus on everyone needs to have customer service skills. So I got to put that I was number 13th in the nation for a customer service competition on my resume. And that's another thing that set me apart, you know, because they were able to go, oh, you know, this guy, he actually is, like, he can program, but he can talk to a customer also. So.
Yay.
It's me, isn't it?
Yep.
What's one of the more demanding or difficult aspects of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, and how do you work through or manage it? We've talked about some of them, but the one that we haven't, I would say, is time management. That's a skill that you can develop as a student. Kind of have to get everything done on time, you know, especially if you're a full-time student and you have any sort of life or job outside of it, then you're busy. So don't think that you need to wait to go to a job to have them show you how they want you to schedule your time. Find out what works for you now. Now, you may end up at a place where they say, oh, here's how we do it. You'll be scheduled like this. But that's not been my experience anywhere. You need to manage your own time and figure out how to get your work done in the time allotted. And most places are not going to give you more than they think you can get done. Like Chris said, they want you to succeed. They want you to be a valuable tool for them. They don't want to just plow you under. So learn how to manage your own time to be able to stay productive. And that's probably the most demanding aspect for me. Chris?
Yeah, I would say definitely that. Time management's tough, especially if you don't have a micromanager. A micromanager kind of, acts in a semi-parental role where they're constantly like, don't forget about this, make sure you get this done, make sure you get this done. We don't have that right now. And you can really hose yourself because you can not do your work and, you're not having anyone there immediately berating you about it or anything, but it catches up. So that's definitely a hard one. Another one for me is communicating. You do a lot of communication with project managers, customers, and if you're a coder, you're in a different world than them. And they may not understand that the data types of their account numbers isn't right, and you're having to strip alpha characters from them, and that stuff doesn't make sense to them. At least not in any practical sense. So communicating what I'm doing to applicable people in my professional world that don't have that tech background, that's tough. And how I work through that is I do a lot of really, it seems kind of silly, but I will get out PowerPoint or Visio or even MS Paint, and I will literally draw a square box and put your customer's computer, labeled on it. And I'll draw an arrow to the server and be like, here's where the server is. And I'll try and illustrate like exactly what I'm doing on a very basic level. Because a lot of people that works. So I've had to do that several times. That's definitely one of the more difficult aspects of my day, is just articulating what I'm doing to people who don't have the background to understand it.
Yep. So what skills or qualities do you think are most important to highlight in a resume? We've talked a lot about resumes so far, but I would sum it up into soft skills. I've worked for and with several people who've said, we can teach someone to program the way we want them to program, as long as they have a fundamental basis of understanding. We can't teach them how to talk to a customer. We can't teach them how to proofread an email. We don't have time for that kind of stuff, even if that is a skill you can learn. So soft skills, communication, customer service, things like that, things that are going to make you not just an attractive developer, but an attractive employee.
All right, Mr. Vaglis. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. What does your work-life balance look like? So I've actually been down burnout alley before from having too much work and no play. So I'm very cognizant of that. Kelly can kind of attest. I play classical guitar. I brought my guitar to work every day, and I literally would, a couple times a day, just lock my computer and walk into a conference room and shut the door and practice guitar. I carried that imposter syndrome thing about that too, where I wanted to, be Mr. Hard Worker all the time. And a good manager knows better and knows that that's actually not good. So like Kelly said, we would take breaks. Our whole team would go take walks. We might go take a long lunch on a certain day and hang out and visit. And, then of course you've got my family stuff where I go floating or hiking or whatever. But but definitely make that a priority, and don't sacrifice that balance for an employer would be my advice, because I've done it in the past, even for higher pay, and it is not worth it. It will destroy you. So.
Yeah, and I think it makes Jack a dull boy. All work, no play makes Kelly absolutely insane, as my wife can attest. So I know the answer or the question is, what does your work-life balance look like? And mine's similar to Chris. You know, I'm fortunate to work for a company and for a team that allows us flexibility in that. They don't just say that it's important, they actually do. Now, I keep bringing up mystery company. Work-life balance was not important to them. In fact, that's why I only worked there for a month. They got upset at me because they said I was visiting the bathroom too frequently during working hours, and I wasn't in my desk enough. I was seen to be getting coffee too often. These sorts of things. But they, you know, big in the interview when I asked them about work-life balance, they said, "Oh yeah, that's important to us," but it obviously wasn't. So I would say it's not just what ours looks like. Decide what it needs to be for you, you know, and remember that when you're looking for a job, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. You know, don't just take a job because it looks like, man, the pay's really great, or it's prestigious, or the parking spot's really close to the door. If it's going to make you miserable, work shouldn't be your whole life. Work should fit your life. Your life shouldn't have to fit work.
All right, how important are secondary skills like speaking another language for the resume and interview process to land a job? We kind of touched on this earlier, and I know just saying secondary skills is a pretty big generalization, but I would say hugely important. That's kind of the stuff we were mentioning earlier, you know, as far as communication or experience talking with customers, customer service experience, etc. Speaking another language in particular is a giant thing. You know, that's definitely was never seen as anything but a plus in my time. I really think those secondary skills and your ability to identify them about yourself and list them is huge. And it's, you know, it's one of those things, it was already mentioned, preloading, getting that resume to look as full as possible. That's part of it. Those secondary skills, as much as you can list that will make people look at it and tie it to, this guy might be even better. This, you know, struggling to find the words here, but yes, hugely important. And Kelly, I'll pass it over to you, but I'm
I would
chewing
say
on something.
think of it this way. You are going to graduate alongside everybody else in your class with the exact same degree. And then you've got other classes at OTC that are also graduating with the same degree. And you got people at MSU and Drury, and everybody's graduating around the same time with a degree. That doesn't set you apart. That puts you in the same pool as everyone else. Your secondary skills are what set you apart. Each one of you has a unique set of secondary skills, and that's what's going to give the employer what they want to choose you versus someone else for a different job. You know, like on our team, everybody knows how to program. That's no big deal. But we'll have one guy who has this skill, and one guy who has, you know, we'll have the guy that's the SQL expert, the guy that's the AS400 expert. And yeah, those aren't secondary skills, but it's the same concept of when your employer or prospective employer can look at your resume and say, yeah, they check all the boxes of what I need. What do they have that I want? So
Yeah,
secondary skills, really important. And I know you'll hear that 100 times and you're probably tired of hearing it. I was, but it's true. Do you ever feel stuck on, yes. Do you ever feel stuck on an assignment while in school or a project at work? How did you get through it? That's yes, 100%. At school, you have limited resources, right? So you have the whole internet. As long as you don't just copy paste, you can do that. But you have less human interaction, or at least it's difficult. You know, it's not plagiarism if you ask your classmate, help me understand how you did this. don't show me what you did, but help me understand how you did this. But you also don't, you can't go to your instructor and say, tell me how to do this, bail me out. At work, you can totally do that. I can go to Chris and say, man, I got no idea. And we've talked about this some, so it's huge in work. In school, it's more difficult, I will admit, but that's part of the struggle. Baby birds got to struggle to learn to fly. And using different resources on the internet and learning how to do it ethically, within the rules, because the rules at school may be different at work, but there's still rules at work. I can't just go look up another company's code and copy it. So I got through it by using, and I don't mean using in a bad way, but by leveraging the resources I had, the people around me, and the research tools that I had access to.
Yeah, and I'll throw one on here. It looks like this is the last question too, but I basically, it's still the worst situation professionally that I've been in, but I had a conversion that I was working on. It was while I was in Kelly's role. And it was a conversion that we've never done before. And instead of having customer names, account numbers, things like that, I just had decimal numbers. And I couldn't make sense of any of it. And I went to like all my team members and I was like, what the heck is this? Like, I've got these numbers, I don't have anything, and nobody could tell me anything. And so I literally just started like Googling, like, values are decimals, help, like whatever I could. And I found out that it was an old style of data called binary compressed decimal, which is super old and nobody uses it anymore. And you basically have to apply a mathematical formula to your number and then take that binary answer that you get and convert it out into a value. And it was way over my head, way over everyone in my department's head, but nobody knew what it was. And it somehow slipped through the cracks and got seated with me in my second month as a developer. And I was literally freaking out because I was like, I'm just not qualified for this. And it finally hit the point where I like pushed the deadline out twice. And like people were riding me and they're like, we need to get this one done. And I was like, I literally don't know how to do this. And I finally just went to my manager and was like, hey, I legit do not know how to do this. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do with it. And they got me with like one of their most senior guys, and he didn't know what the heck it was. And then that bumped up to our dev team and they didn't know what it was. And it eventually wound up with sales being like, why the heck did you say we could do this? Nobody knows what this is. And it was validating. So to answer your question, and the reason I bring that story up, how did I get through it? I'm going to go back to, don't let imposter syndrome fool you and ask questions. This is my biggest piece of advice, biggest takeaway that I would give. Don't be ashamed of not having the answers. Be eager to get them. So.
Awesome advice. That looks like the
Renee,
last
you got
question.
anything else? Other questions? I don't know. I have no idea where we're at on time. I know
Yeah.
Chris and I got to get back at some point.
We have about 10 minutes of class, and they're all really upset that they're not going to be able to give presentations, but I think it'll work out okay. They would rather hear what you have to say. So
Oh, I can just see how disappointed they are.
let me see.
Lost you, Renee. Can't hear you. There you go.
Is it back?
Yep.
Okay,
back.
come on up here.
Oh, I was just gonna tell it to you and you can repeat it for me, but I was just gonna ask, do you anticipate that your workspace will go back to being in person after, the situation around COVID has resolved? Or do you think a lot of it will still be working from home?
We can hear him, Renee.
Could you-
Yeah, we can hear. And Chris, you might back me up on this. I'm not 100% sure what I'm allowed to say because I'm not 100% sure what's internal only communication and what's not. I'll tell you this from an industry-wide perspective. What we understand is that a lot of programming was already available to be done remotely, and that the biggest challenge to that has been the previous generations of managers and CEOs and executives that maybe didn't fully believe in it, you know, didn't really think you could do everything from home. And that this now has been like an experiment for the last 6 months, and they've been forced to see, hey, yeah, it does work. Or in their case,
Really
if it
big
doesn't.
building over there, and they have really big buildings in Kansas City and really big buildings in lots of.
Yeah. So I think a lot of places like Jack Henry have a lot of money tied up in facilities, and where those companies can see that they can save a lot of money on those facilities by having their employees work remotely, I think a lot of that will continue. However, somebody's got to, you know, plug hard drives into machines. Somebody's got to ship hard drives from one company to another. There are always going to be in-person things, but I think after all this, there will be a lot more remote work available.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add there. I would say you're spot on. I can't imagine people not recognizing the savings and the potential bottom line change. So I bet it stays more remote if I had to guess. But I don't know. There's something to be said. Like, I keep driving communication, and when you see people every day, certainly makes it easier to communicate. So we'll see. It's uncertain times.
Speaking of that, there's a question in the chat. How and why did your team get better at communication? Was
I
that
think ours,
meant?
Yeah, you take this one.
yeah, ours really had to do with our manager. In my opinion, we had a team that wasn't very communicative before that, and we had a manager who was honestly not a very good manager. Very just rolling everything down from above and micromanaging, and people were constantly, more than trying to help each other, just trying to cover their own rears. And it created that environment of like, don't tell people what you're doing because they might try and get you in trouble to save their own butt. And it was a toxic environment. And you run into those just like in relationships in life. You run into them, you're gonna run into them at work. But we kind of transitioned into different leadership, and that different leadership encouraged more talking and a manager who was interested in covering his team's back instead of, you know, throwing them to the wolves. And that created an environment where people were eager to share and help each other and learn. And that's huge. So I would say, you know, a lot of that's just luck of the draw, but also a lot of that is, you know, in those moments where you can blame someone else for something you did wrong, don't do it. Don't participate in that kind of toxic environment. You know, take responsibility when you mess up. So I don't know if that answers the question. That's as close as I can get, though.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a nebulous thing. We've noticed, so like when we're all in the office before pre-vid, if someone was out one day, the whole dynamic of the office changed. Like just based on that person not being available to be a part of a catalyst. And not like one specific person, but anyone being out just kind of changed things. So I think, you know, our team has doubled in size since 2 or 3 years ago. I was part of that influx, and maybe not doubled, but still, you know, it was just kind of an organic thing. I think, like he mentioned, there's catalysts like changing of managers, but it's kind of organic between the team of just developing some work personal relationships, like going out to lunch once in a while, or things that help us be able to communicate better.
Anybody else?
What else we got?
Well, we got him.
I'm trying to think of how to word this. What advice would you give to the students? I'm going to speak from personal perspective because I feel like maybe I'm like the outlier and not like the best coder, but I love what I do. What advice would you give to people who feel that way in class? If you can think of that.
I would say I'm jealous of you. No, seriously. We had, I've encountered 2 or 3 people that truly just, they love coding. You know, I would consider myself, I love music. Music's kind of my thing. and finding a career in that regard, not easy. Coding, if you love coding, you can find a career in it. You're going to be, if you stay in that mind state, you're going to be more successful than the people around you, has been my experience. I've worked with 2 or 3 people that absolutely, like, outside of work, they're doing tiny code competitions. They love it. It's just their thing. And they've been the real, like, you can tell a difference when you work with them, that they're just on another level. And it's not necessarily that they're that much more intelligent innately. They just love it. So they really pour their heart into it, and it makes a difference. I think it's huge. I think it's a huge, huge, huge benefit. So
Yeah, I would only add to that, if you enjoy it, you're gonna get better at it. I mean, and being good at something gives you joy in it sometimes, you know? Like, naturally as humans, we enjoy doing something we're good at. So I would say, I obviously have no idea where you're at with things, but don't sell yourself short. You know, be careful that you're not telling yourself you're horrible when in reality, you know, it's a spectrum. Sure, there are geniuses that can just sit down and dump something out, and there are people who struggle to put semicolons at the end of their lines. But
not a time for insults against me. Jeez.
yeah. But yeah, don't sell yourself short, and realize that it's like we said before, I feel like programming is a way of thinking, and the actual skill of the syntax, that comes and goes. It comes and goes with jobs, with code styles at different places, and with different languages. Don't sell yourself short on being a good programmer because you have difficulty with syntax. Yeah, so this there's no names, it's just usernames. So HTML, so Kirsten, I'm gonna say that was, said the best part of coding isn't necessarily making the product, it's the satisfaction of solving a problem. 100%.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You pick up at school, you pick up from your instructors. That's what I think is awesome about OTC. The instructors are not there because they just need a job. They bring things like this out. Renee's brought out a few things like that as well, where enjoy what you're doing. And if you do, then that's good.
We're about out of time. Any final thoughts for everybody?
I like Chris's sweater.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you very much.
And the really cool wood wall. I like that.
Yeah, I live in the woods in a cabin, so a lot of wood.
Final words of wisdom?
I want to say thank you for questions. That makes this enjoyable for us. You know, being able to come and have a set of questions ahead of time is awesome because it lets us think about it a little bit and not be off the cuff on everything. Although, you know, the questions at the end that are based on whatever, those are enjoyable too. But just thanks for being a good audience, and that started a week ago already. So. Great. Chris, any final thoughts, or is he headed out?
No, I don't think I really have much else. Just don't fall for imposter syndrome. My biggest advice.
Thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate it. We let everybody get out of here. Have a great day. I'm going to give them a hand. Yay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to close this session. So thank you so much.
Yep, we'll see you guys later.